The girl stood on a wooden crate in the center of Stillwater's dusty square, her wrists bound with hemp rope so tight the fibers had drawn blood. She couldn't have been more than 13, maybe younger, her frame so small the white cotton dress hung from her shoulders like a sheet draped over a scarecrow. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves across her face, but she didn't try to hide behind it. She stared straight ahead, past the crowd, past the auctioneer, past everything, like she'd already left her body behind. Lot 17, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming across the square. He was a thick man with a gray beard stained yellow at the corners of his mouth, his vest stretched tight over his gut. 13 years old, healthy, no family, no debts, clean bill from the dock, comes with a signed contract, legal and binding under territorial marriage law. A few men in the crowd shifted their weight, some looked down, others leaned forward. The girl's lips trembled, then, barely louder than the wind, she whispered, "I'm too young to be a bride." No one responded. The auctioneer grinned wider. "Bidding starts at $20. A hand went up near the back, then another. The girl's knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself. Her eyes darted across the faces, men in dusty hats, women clutching shawls, children peeking between legs. She looked for something, someone, anyone who might see her as more than livestock. Then her gaze landed on him. Cade Mercer stood near the edge of the square, half shadowed by the overhang of the general store. He was tall, lean, weathered in the way men got when they spent more time with cattle than people. His hat sat low, his jaw tight, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. He wasn't bidding, he wasn't moving, but he was looking right at her. And she saw it, the flinch, the way his expression cracked for just a second before he turned his face away. "Shame." $30, someone called out. 35. The girl's breathing quickened, her bound hands twisted against the rope. "Please," she said, louder now, her voice cracking. "I'm too young, I don't please, I'm just." $40, a man shouted from the front row. He was older, maybe 60, with a crooked smile and tobacco-stained teeth. 40, and I'll take her today. The auctioneer slapped his thigh. "Now we're talking, $40, do I hear 45? Cade's jaw clenched, his fingers curled into fists inside his pockets. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a hand around his throat. He'd seen auctions before, plenty of them in the years after the war. Some legal, some not. Most people turned their heads and pretended it wasn't happening. That's what you did if you wanted to survive in a place like Stillwater. But this girl, something about her face, the way her eyes had locked onto his, searching. And then it hit him, a flash of memory so sharp it nearly knocked the air from his lungs. 8 years ago, a burned-out homestead 15 miles south of here, bodies in the dirt, a woman clutching a child, both of them gone, and a little girl, maybe 5 years old, screaming from inside a root cellar, her voice hoarse and desperate. Cade had been riding with a marshal's posse, tracking raiders. They'd arrived too late. The family was already dead, but the girl. He'd pulled her out himself, wrapped her in his coat, held her while she sobbed into his chest. He remembered her scar, a thin line across her left eyebrow where she'd fallen against a fence post weeks earlier. Her mother had told him about it while they'd shared coffee on the porch, back when the world still made sense. And now, standing on that crate with her wrists bound and her dress torn at the shoulder, was that same little girl. The scar was still there. Cade's heart stopped. $50. The voice came from the man with the crooked smile. He stepped forward, pulling a pouch from his belt. 50, cash, right now. The auctioneer's grin stretched wider. Sold to $100. The square went silent. Every head turned. Cade stepped out from the shadow of the storefront, his hand raised, his voice steady. 100, cash. The auctioneer blinked. "Well now, that's a generous offer, friend. You got that kind of money on you." Cade reached into his coat and pulled out a folded stack of bills, money he'd been saving for 6 months to buy breeding stock. He held it up so everyone could see. The man with the crooked smile scowled. What the hell you need a child bride for, Mercer? You don't even come to town. Cade didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the auctioneer. 100, you taking it or not? The auctioneer licked his lips. Then he nodded. Sold to Cade Mercer. Cade walked forward, counting out the bills into the auctioneer's palm. The crowd murmured, some curious, some suspicious. The girl stared at him, her face pale, her body trembling. When the auctioneer stepped aside, Cade limbed onto the platform and untied the rope around her wrists. His hands were steady, but his chest felt like it was caving in. She flinched when his fingers brushed her skin. Easy, he said quietly. I'm not gonna hurt you. Her eyes searched his face. Why? Cade didn't answer. He finished untying the knots and stepped back. Come on. She hesitated, then climbed down from the crate on shaking legs. Cade draped his coat over her shoulders and guided her toward his horse, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the weight of 100 judgments pressing against his back. As they walked, the girl glanced up at him. Do I know you? Cade's throat tightened. No. But he was lying. And somewhere deep in the dust, and the shame and the noise of that terrible square, he knew she'd figure it out eventually. The ride back to Cade's ranch was silent, except for the creak of leather and the rhythmic thud of hooves on hard-packed earth. The girl sat in front of him on the saddle, her body stiff, her hands gripping the pommel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Cade kept one arm loosely around her waist to keep her steady, but he didn't speak, didn't know what to say. What do you tell a child you just bought? The sun hung low by the time they reached his property, a modest spread with a single-story cabin, a barn, and a few corrals holding cattle. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, isolated, no neighbors for miles. Cade dismounted first, then helped her down. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her elbow. You hungry? He asked. She didn't answer, just stared at the cabin like it was a cage. Cade sighed and led her inside. The interior was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a bed in the corner. He gestured toward the table. Sit, I'll heat some stew. She sat, but her eyes never left him, watching, calculating. Cade moved to the stove, stirring the pot of leftover rabbit stew from the night before. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, she spoke. What do you want from me? Cade glanced over his shoulder. Nothing. Everyone wants something. Not me. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You paid $100. Nobody does that for nothing. Cade set the spoon down and turned to face her. I didn't buy you to own you. Then why? He hesitated. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, but he couldn't force it out. Not yet. Instead, he said, because it was wrong. What they were doing, it was wrong. Her expression hardened. So you're a hero? No. Then what are you? Cade looked away. Just a man trying not to make the same mistake twice. She tilted her head, studying him. What mistake? Before he could answer, her gaze drifted to the mantel above the stove and froze. There, sitting between a tobacco tin and a chipped mug, was a small wooden horse, hand-carved, painted white with black spots. The girl stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. She crossed the room and picked up the horse, turning it over in her hands. Where did you get this? Her voice was barely a whisper. Cade's stomach dropped. It's just something I found. Liar. She spun to face him, her eyes blazing. This was mine. My father made this for me when I was 5. I had it the day. She stopped, her face went pale. The day what? Cade asked quietly. Her hands trembled around the wooden horse. The day they came, the raiders, they burned our house, killed my parents, my brother. I was hiding in the cellar and someone. Her voice broke. Someone pulled me out. Cade said nothing. The girl's eyes locked onto his, wide and disbelieving. It was you. He didn't deny it. You were there, she whispered. You saved me, you, her voice cracked. You wrapped me in your coat. You told me it was going to be okay. Cade exhaled slowly. Yeah. And then you left me. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I didn't have a choice, Cade said. The marshal's posse had to keep moving. We handed you over to a church group in the next town. They were supposed to take care of you. They didn't. Her voice was flat, empty. They kept me for 2 years. Then they sold me to a man who said he'd raise me proper. He worked me like a mule and locked me in a shed at night. When I turned 12, he sold me again, and today was the 4th time I've stood on an auction block. Cade felt something inside him shatter. I didn't know, he said hoarsely. I swear I didn't know. Would it have mattered? He flinched. She set the wooden horse back on the mantel, her fingers lingering on it for a moment. Then she turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Why did you keep it? She asked. Cade swallowed hard. Because I couldn't forget. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I looked at that thing, I remembered your face, the way you screamed, the way you begged me not to leave you. His voice cracked. And I left you anyway. The girl stared at him for a long moment, then she said, What's your name? Cade Mercer. I'm Eliza. I know. Her eyes narrowed. How? Your mother told me before. He couldn't finish the sentence. Eliza's jaw tightened. She looked away, blinking rapidly. You don't owe me anything, Cade Mercer. Guilt doesn't change the past. No, he agreed, but maybe it can change what comes next. She shook her head. You think keeping me here makes it better? You think one good deed erases 8 years? No, Cade said quietly, but it's a start. Eliza stared at him, her anger flickering like a candle in the wind. Then, finally, she sat back down at the table. I'm still hungry, she said. Cade nodded and returned to the stove. As he ladled stew into a bowl, he heard her whisper, so soft he almost missed it. Thank you. He didn't turn around, didn't trust himself to speak. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. And in the quiet of that small cabin, 2 people who had been strangers, and then something more, sat together and ate in silence. But the silence, for the first time in years, didn't feel so heavy. 3 days passed. Eliza didn't say much. She helped with small tasks, feeding the chickens, fetching water from the well, sweeping the cabin floor, but she moved through the world like a ghost. Cade gave her space, didn't push, didn't ask questions. But on the 4th morning, the peace shattered. Cade was out mending a fence line when he heard it, the low thunder of hoofbeats rolling across the valley. He straightened, shielding his eyes against the sun, and counted 5 riders cresting the ridge. His gut tightened. He recognized the man in front. Marshal Dorian Pike. Pike had been a Union officer during the war, the kind of man who believed the ends always justified the means. After the war, he'd pinned on a badge and started enforcing law in the territories, but his version of law had more to do with power than justice. He'd been involved in land grabs, forced evictions, and worse, and he had friends in high places. Cade walked back toward the cabin, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Eliza was inside, kneading dough at the table. She looked up when he entered. Someone's coming, he said. Her face went pale. Who? Marshal Pike, and he's not alone. Eliza's hands froze in the dough. He knows I'm here. Probably. What do we do? Cade grabbed his rifle from above the door and checked the chamber. Stay inside. Don't come out unless I say so. Cade, stay inside. He stepped onto the porch just as the riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. Pike dismounted first, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and cold gray eyes. He wore a black coat and a silver star pinned to his chest. The 4 men with him looked like hired guns, hard faces, hands resting on pistol grips. Pike smiled. Cade Mercer, been a while. Cade didn't lower the rifle. What do you want, Pike? Just here on official business. Pike pulled a folded paper from his coat. Got a writ here, says you're harboring stolen property. I didn't steal anything. That girl you bought at auction, turns out the contract wasn't legal. The man who sold her didn't have proper custody, so technically she belongs to her legal guardian. And who's that? Pike's smile widened. Me. Cade's finger tightened on the rifle. You're lying. Am I? Pike unfolded the paper and held it up. This here's a court order signed by Judge Harlan himself. Says the girl, Eliza Crenshaw, is to be remanded into my custody until her legal status can be determined. Judge Harlan's crooked as a dog's hind leg, and you know it. Pike shrugged. Law's the law, Mercer. Now you gonna hand her over peacefully, or do we have to do this the hard way? Cade's mind raced. He couldn't fight 5 men. Even if he got Pike, the others would gun him down before he could reload. But he also couldn't let them take her. She's not going anywhere, Cade said. Pike sighed. I was hoping you'd say that. One of the hired guns stepped forward, his hand moving toward his pistol. Then a voice rang out from the barn. Pike! Everyone turned. An older man stepped out from the shadows, grizzled, bow-legged, with a shotgun cradled in his arms. His name was Amos Tate, and he'd worked cattle with Cade for nearly a decade. Amos, Pike said, his smile fading, this doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't, Amos spat into the dirt. I know what you did during the war, Pike. I know how you burned out families and called them traitors just to grab their land. You think slapping a badge on your chest makes you righteous. Another figure appeared behind Amos, a younger man named Ben Holloway, then another, and another. Cade's chest tightened. 6 ranch hands, all armed, all standing between Pike and the cabin. Pike's jaw clenched. You boys are making a big mistake. Maybe, Amos said, but we've made worse. Pike looked at Cade, then at the men, then back at the cabin, for a long moment. No one moved. Then Pike smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. All right, he said, we'll do this the legal way, but you better lawyer up, Mercer, because I'm coming back, and next time I won't be asking. He mounted his horse and gestured to his men. They rode out slowly, deliberately, their eyes never leaving the cabin. When they were gone, Cade lowered the rifle and exhaled. Amos walked over, shaking his head. You're in deep now, Cade. I know. What you gonna do? Cade looked back at the cabin, where Eliza stood in the doorway, her face pale but defiant. Whatever it takes, he said. So here's the question that changes everything. If you were Cade, knowing Pike would come back with more men, more power, and the law on his side, would you run? Would you stand and fight? Or would you trust that the truth could somehow win in a world that had stopped caring about it? Think about that. And if you're still with me, let me know what time it is where you are. Pour yourself some coffee. Because what comes next will test everything Cade thought he knew about justice, redemption, and what it means to protect someone when the whole world wants to take them away. That night, Cade couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a blanket draped over his shoulders, watching the stars. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting his lungs. His rifle rested across his lap, loaded and ready. Inside the cabin, Eliza was supposed to be sleeping, but Cade heard the floorboards creak, and a moment later, the door opened. She stepped out, wrapped in a quilt, and sat down beside him without a word. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Finally, Eliza spoke. You should have let him take me. Cade shook his head. No. He'll come back, and next time he'll bring more men, maybe the army. You'll lose everything. Maybe. So why? Cade stared out at the dark valley, because some things are worth losing everything for. Eliza pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. You don't even know me. I know enough. Like what? Cade thought for a moment. I know you're stronger than you think. I know you've survived things that would have broken most people. And I know you deserve a chance to be something other than someone's property. Eliza's eyes glistened. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. My mother used to say that, she whispered, that I was strong, that I could survive anything. She was right. She's dead. I know. Eliza's voice cracked. I watched them burn, all of them, my father, my brother. I heard them screaming and I couldn't do anything. I just hid like a coward. You were 5 years old. That doesn't make it better. Cade turned to look at her. You were a child, Eliza. You did what you had to do to survive. That's not cowardice, that's courage. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. I don't feel brave, I feel broken. Cade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he rested his hand on her shoulder. Then we'll fix it, he said, one piece at a time. Eliza looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. Why do you care so much? Cade's throat tightened. Because I should have cared 8 years ago. I should have made sure you were safe. I should have fought harder. And I didn't. So now I'm trying to do what I should have done then. That's not fair to you. Maybe not, but it's the truth. Eliza wiped her eyes with the edge of the quilt. What if Pike wins? What if the law sides with him? Then we'll figure something else out. Like what? Cade didn't have an answer, so instead he said, You ever ridden a horse by yourself? Eliza blinked, confused by the sudden shift. What? A horse? You ever ridden one on your own? No, I've only ever been a passenger. Cade stood and held out his hand. Come on. No. Why not? Eliza hesitated, then took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They walked to the barn, where Cade's gelding, a sturdy chestnut named Rust, stood dozing in his stall. Cade saddled him quickly and led him out into the moonlit yard. All right, Cade said, foot in the stirrup, pull yourself up. Eliza did as he instructed, wobbling slightly before settling into the saddle. Rust shifted beneath her, and she gripped the pommel tight. Easy, Cade said. He's not gonna hurt you, just sit steady. He handed her the reins and stepped back. Eliza stared down at him, her eyes wide. What do I do? Whatever you want, he'll follow your lead. She nudged Rust gently with her heels. The horse started forward at a slow walk, circling the yard. Eliza's grip relaxed slightly, and a small, tentative smile touched her lips. Cade watched from the fence, his arms crossed, something warm spreading through his chest. For the first time since he'd found her on that auction block, she looked like a child. Not property, not a victim. Just a girl on a horse under the stars. When she finally dismounted, her smile was wider. That was. Good. Do you? Yeah. Cade nodded. You're a natural. Eliza looked up at him, and for a moment, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of trust. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. Cade's throat tightened. I won't. They walked back to the cabin together, side by side, and for the first time since Pike's visit, Cade allowed himself to hope. Maybe they'd survive this. Maybe they'd find a way. And maybe, just maybe, broken things could still be made whole. Pike returned 6 days later. But this time, he wasn't alone. Cade heard them before he saw them, a low rumble of voices and hoofbeats echoing across the valley. He stepped onto the porch and counted at least 20 riders cresting the ridge. Pike rode at the front, flanked by hired guns and a handful of men wearing territorial militia uniforms. Eliza appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Cade. Stay inside. No. He turned to her. Eliza. I'm not hiding anymore. Before he could argue, Amos and the ranch hands appeared from the barn, rifles in hand. Ben Holloway stepped up beside Cade, his jaw set. We're not letting them take her. Cade wanted to argue, wanted to tell them it wasn't their fight, but the words stuck in his throat. Pike and his men pulled up in front of the cabin, forming a wide semicircle. Pike dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. Last chance, Mercer, he said. Hand over the girl, or I'll arrest you for obstruction of justice. She's not going anywhere. Pike's eyes narrowed. Then you're all under arrest. One of the militia men stepped forward, a young soldier with nervous eyes. Marshal, maybe we should. Shut up. Pike drew his pistol. And then a voice rang out from behind them. That's far enough, Pike. Everyone turned. A tall man rode into the clearing on a black horse, his badge glinting in the sunlight. Sheriff Clayton Webb. He was older than Pike, gray-haired and weathered, but his eyes were sharp. Pike's expression darkened. Webb, this is territorial jurisdiction. You've got no authority here. Actually, I do. Webb dismounted and pulled a folded document from his saddlebag. Got a telegram from the governor's office this morning. Seems someone filed a complaint about illegal child auctions operating in Stillwater. Governor's ordered a full investigation, and until that investigation is complete, all custody transfers are suspended. Pike's face went red. That's bull. And, Webb continued, I've got signed affidavits from 3 witnesses who say you've been running protection for those auctions, pocketing a cut of every sale. The militia men exchanged glances. One of them lowered his rifle. Pike's hand tightened on his pistol. You're making a mistake, Webb. Maybe, but I'd rather make a mistake than let a child get sold like cattle. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Pike holstered his pistol. He looked at Cade, his eyes cold. This isn't over. Yeah, Cade said, it is. Pike mounted his horse and rode out, his men following. The militia stayed behind, shifting awkwardly. Webb turned to Cade. You got a place for that girl to stay? Yeah. Good, keep her safe until the governor's office sorts this out. Shouldn't take more than a few weeks. Cade nodded, thank you. Webb tipped his hat and rode off. When the dust settled, Eliza stepped off the porch and walked over to Cade. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Amos clapped Cade on the shoulder. You did good, Cade. We all did. Ben grinned. Guess we're outlaws now. Cade shook his head. No, just decent people. Weeks turned into months. The investigation took longer than expected, but eventually the governor's office issued a ruling. All child auctions in the territory were illegal, and anyone involved would face prosecution. Pike was arrested and stripped of his badge. Judge Harlan was removed from the bench. And Eliza was granted legal independence. No guardian, no contract, no chains. Cade offered to let her stay as long as she wanted. She accepted. She learned to ride Rust on her own. She helped with the cattle. She planted a vegetable garden behind the cabin and spent hours tending it. Slowly, the haunted look in her eyes faded. One evening, nearly a year after Cade had pulled her off that auction block, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Eliza held the wooden horse in her hands, turning it over slowly. You know, she said, I used to hate this thing. Why? Because it reminded me of everything I lost. Cade nodded. But now, she looked up at him, now it reminds me of what I found. Cade's chest tightened. Eliza set the horse on the porch railing and stood. I'm gonna check on the chickens. All right. She paused at the edge of the porch. Cade. Yes. Thank you for everything. He nodded. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I wanted to. She walked toward the barn, her steps light, her shoulders straight. Cade watched her go, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He thought about the little girl he'd pulled from a cellar 8 years ago. The girl who'd screamed and clung to him and begged him not to leave. And he thought about the young woman she'd become, strong, resilient, unbroken. The sun dipped below the ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Cade picked up the wooden horse and ran his thumb over the worn paint. Some mistakes, he realized, could be redeemed. Not erased, not forgotten, but redeemed. And that, he thought, was enough.